The sun was merciless that day, pouring down over the endless stretch of red desert and painting the horizon in waves of heat. Jake Calder's shadow stretched long across the canyon floor as his horse stumbled beneath him, its breath coming in ragged bursts. Dust clung to his coat, to the brim of his hat, to every crease of his face. He'd been riding for days, maybe weeks. He'd lost track somewhere between the ache in his bones and the ghosts that followed him. He wasn't running toward anything anymore. Just away, from the war, from the blood, from the kind of memories that stain a man's soul no matter how far he rides. The world had changed since he'd worn the Union blue. The towns were growing, the land was being divided, and men like him, broken, wandering, half alive, were becoming relics of a time that no one wanted to remember. Jake had hoped the desert would be his final piece. A place to fade into nothing. But fate has a cruel way of finding those who try to hide. It happened fast. He was crossing a narrow pass between two stone cliffs when the first gunshot split the silence. His horse reared, a flash of fear in its eyes, and then another shot rang out. Jake felt the burn tear through his ribs, a deep, gutting pain that knocked the breath clean out of him. He fell hard, the ground rushing up to meet him. His head tumbled away, and the world became a blur of sky and dust and pain. He tried to draw his revolver, but his fingers were slick with blood. 3 men appeared out of the haze, outlaws, from the look of them. Rough faces, laughter that stank of whiskey and cruelty. They weren't soldiers, just scavengers, hunting what little the world still had to offer. "Shoulda stayed home, old man," one sneered as he kicked Jake's gun away. Jake's vision wavered, he spat blood and forced a weak smile. "Ain't got one." The outlaw laughed, then turned to search his saddlebags. "Well, now you ain't got nothin'." Jake's hand twitched toward the knife at his boot. He moved slowly, pretending to fade, but when the outlaw leaned close, Jake struck. The blade sliced across the man's arm. The outlaw shouted in pain, stumbling back. Jake's revolver was still within reach. He fired one desperate shot. The bullet hit one of them in the leg before the world spun into darkness again. When Jake woke, the sun was sinking. His mouth was dry as stone, his shirt soaked with blood. The men were gone, leaving him to die alone among the canyons. The air smelled of iron and dust. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, fading like the last light on the rocks. "This how it ends," he muttered weakly. His voice was nothing more than a dry whisper. He thought of the people he'd lost, his brother Tom, who'd died at Shiloh, his mother, who'd waited for her sons to come home and only got one back, the woman he'd once loved, who couldn't stand the silence in him anymore. Maybe, he thought, death would be a kindness. His eyes fluttered closed. The last thing he expected was the sound of footsteps, soft, light, almost like a whisper. When he opened his eyes again, he saw her. At first, he thought she was a vision brought on by pain and thirst. A woman stood above him, her skin glowing bronze under the fading light, her long dark hair moving with the wind. She wore buckskin, beaded and simple, and her eyes, dark and deep, were unlike any he'd ever seen. Calm, but sharp, like she could see through his soul. "White man," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "You should not be here." Jake tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Guess, I didn't plan it this way." Her gaze lingered on the blood seeping from his side. She knelt beside him, untying the leather pouch slung across her shoulder. Her hands moved with purpose, gathering herbs, tearing fabric, mixing something that smelled sharp and earthy. When she pressed the cloth to his wound, he groaned in pain. "You are dying," she said simply. He managed a faint chuckle. "Ain't that a surprise?" She didn't smile. Her focus never wavered. She worked quickly, muttering words under her breath, soft, melodic syllables in a language he didn't understand. The pain dulled, then deepened, then dulled again until it was just a throb in the background. Jake blinked, watching her. "Why help me?" he whispered. She looked up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, he thought she might walk away. But instead, she said, "Because no one should die alone. Even if he is not one of my people." He wanted to thank her, but his eyelids grew heavy. He heard her humming, a low, rhythmic sound that soothed him like the sway of a river. Before darkness took him again, he heard her whisper something, soft but fierce, "Don't go." When Jake opened his eyes again, the sky was full of stars. A fire crackled nearby, and the smell of smoke and sage filled the air. He turned his head and saw her sitting by the flames, her silhouette framed by the light. She was grinding herbs in a small bowl, her movements patient and deliberate. You're awake, she said without looking up. He tried to sit, but the pain shot through him. She moved quickly, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. Don't. You'll open the wound again. He obeyed, sinking back into the blanket she'd laid beneath him. You saved me, he murmured. I kept you alive, she corrected. The rest is for the spirits to decide. Her name, he later learned, was Naya. Her mother had been a healer, her father a warrior. She lived alone now, after her people had been scattered by raids and soldiers. The desert was her home, and she moved through it like she belonged to every grain of sand. Over the next few days, she came and went, fetching water from the river, bringing him bits of roasted rabbit, checking his bandages. She spoke little, but her silence wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone who listened to everything, the wind, the fire, the heartbeat of the earth itself. Jake grew stronger, though he still winced every time he moved. Sometimes he caught her watching him, not with suspicion, but with something he couldn't quite name. Maybe pity, maybe curiosity. One evening, when the sun bled gold across the canyon walls, Jake asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" She looked out toward the horizon. I did once, she said softly. But the world outside took everything from me. Here, at least, the land still remembers who I am. He nodded, understanding more than he expected to. The world outside took a lot from me, too. Her gaze returned to him. Then perhaps that is why you were brought here. That night, Jake lay awake, listening to the desert sing. He thought about her words, about how easily she'd stepped into the role of savior when she had every reason to hate him. He thought about the way her hands didn't tremble, how her voice carried calm in a world full of chaos. For the first time in years, he felt something inside him shift, something fragile, like hope trying to breathe again. He looked toward where she slept by the dying fire, her face peaceful under the starlight. The wind moved gently through the canyon, carrying with it the faint echo of her voice, the same words that had pulled him back from the edge of death. Don't go, she had said. And somehow, he hadn't. The sun had barely lifted over the horizon when Jake stirred awake. His ribs ached with every breath, and the faint sting of herbs still clung to his skin. For a moment, he thought the silence was normal, the usual peace of the canyon morning, but then he saw Naya standing by the fire, her body tense, her head tilted toward the wind. Something was wrong. Her eyes flickered with the sharp awareness of someone who had survived too many ambushes. What is it? Jake asked, voice low and rough. Naya didn't turn her head. Men, she whispered. 3 of them. They come this way. Jake's heart kicked hard against his chest. Outlaws, he muttered. They must have followed my trail. He tried to push himself upright, but the pain cut through him like lightning. Naya turned, her dark eyes fierce. You will not move. If you do, you die before the bullet finds you. She moved swiftly, gathering her bow and a small quiver of arrows. Her hands didn't tremble. The calm she carried wasn't the absence of fear, it was the strength to face it. Jake watched her move, feeling the bitter frustration of his weakness. He'd been a soldier once, a protector, and now he couldn't even stand without bleeding. They'll kill you, he rasped. You can't fight all of them. Naya glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. Then I will die as my mother did, protecting what is sacred. He wanted to argue, but there was something about her tone that silenced him. She was already part of the earth, part of the wind and dust that shaped the canyon. You couldn't argue with nature, you could only pray it was kind. She vanished into the rocks above, her form blending with the stone. Jake could hear the distant sound of horses, rough voices echoing through the canyon's curve. He gritted his teeth and pulled himself toward his revolver, every inch of movement sending fire through his ribs. Come on, you old fool, he muttered. One more fight. The voices grew louder. The outlaws emerged from the canyon pass, their eyes scanning the ground for tracks. They were the same men, at least, what was left of them. One limped from Jake's bullet wound, another had a scar where Naya's arrow would soon find him. There, one of them said, pointing toward the thin trail of smoke from Naya's campfire. He's alive, told ya. The leader grinned. Let's finish it, boys. As they advanced, Naya waited above them, her breath steady. She drew her bowstring slowly, the arrow's tip glinting in the morning light. When the first man came into range, she released. The arrow flew true, striking deep into his chest. He fell without a sound. The others cursed, ducking for cover behind rocks. Jake used the moment to pull himself up enough to aim. His vision blurred, but he squeezed the trigger, one clean shot that hit the second man in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Naya fired again, another arrow slicing through the air. It missed, splintering against a rock, and in the next second, the last outlaw spotted her. He moved fast, climbing the ridge with his gun drawn. She turned, reaching for another arrow, but he was already there, his hand clamping around her wrist, the gun pressing cold against her temple. "Drop it, cowboy," the man shouted down the slope. "Drop it, or she's done." Jake froze, the revolver heavy in his trembling hand. Sweat stung his eyes, blood seeped through his bandages, but none of that mattered. He saw Naya's face, fearless even with death so close. Her eyes met his, calm and certain. "Let her go," Jake said, his voice steady despite the pain. The outlaw sneered. "Don't think you're in a position to ask favors. I'll take what's in that camp, then maybe I'll let her go." "You ain't talkin' anything," Jake growled. "Last chance, old man," the outlaw snapped. "Drop the gun, or she." Jake fired before he could finish. The bullet struck true. The man's body went stiff, then slack, tumbling down the rocks like a rag doll. His gun went off once on the way down, the shot echoing uselessly into the sky. Naya flinched as the body fell beside her, the sound of it echoing through the canyon. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she scrambled down the slope toward him, her feet kicking dust into the wind. Jake's revolver slipped from his hand as he sagged backward, the last of his strength spent. "Jake," her voice broke as she reached him, kneeling beside his blood-soaked shirt. "No, no, not again." He tried to smile, but his lips were pale. "Told you, I wasn't good at staying dead," he murmured weakly. "Don't talk," she said, pressing her hand to his wound. "You've lost too much blood." "Been worse," he lied, though he could feel the darkness closing in. His vision flickered, and for a second, he saw her not as a warrior, but as something far more powerful, life itself, refusing to let go of him. Her tears fell freely now, dropping onto his cheek as she whispered, "Don't go. Not this time. Don't go." Her voice was the same as before, soft but commanding, ancient and alive. She began to chant again, the same words she had spoken when she found him, words carried through generations of healers. Her hands trembled over his heart, her palms glowing faintly in the firelight as the air filled with something unseen but deeply felt. Jake's breathing slowed, then steadied. The color began to return to his face. The pain didn't vanish, but it dulled, as though something had pulled him back from the edge once more. Hours passed before he stirred. Naya sat beside him, exhausted, her hair tangled, her eyes rimmed red. When he opened his eyes, she nearly collapsed from relief. "Reckon I owe you twice now," he whispered. "You owe the spirits," she replied softly, brushing the dirt from his face. "And maybe me a little." He chuckled weakly. "Guess I'll have to stick around long enough to repay that debt." Naya looked at him, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and a smile. "Then you stay. Heal. This land will not hurt you again if you respect it." "I'll learn," he said, meaning it more than he had meant anything in years. Over the following weeks, the canyon grew quiet again. Jake recovered slowly, walking a little farther each day, helping gather wood or water when his strength allowed. The bond between them deepened not through words but through silence, shared glances, laughter around the fire, moments when their hands brushed without meaning to. One evening, as twilight painted the sky purple, Jake asked, "Why did you save me again? You could have let me go." Naya gazed into the fire, her face calm. "Because I've lost too much already. And maybe the desert sent you here for a reason." He nodded, thinking about that long after she'd gone to sleep. Maybe she was right. Maybe every scar, every mile, every mistake had led him here, to this woman, this canyon, this second chance at being human again. In time, Jake stayed. He helped her tend the land, built a small corral for wild horses, and learned her ways, how to read the wind, how to listen when the desert spoke. Sometimes travelers passed through and spoke of the cowboy who had died once and come back, who lived now with an Apache healer in the heart of the Red Canyons. Jake would just smile when he heard it. Maybe it was true. Maybe he had died that day in the dust. Maybe what came back to life wasn't the same man who fell. And sometimes, when the wind swept through the canyon at night, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and smoke, he could still hear her voice, soft, eternal, alive with love and command. "Don't go," it whispered. And he never did.